So thank you so much for joining us, and I'm excited to introduce our two presenters today. Terry Helton, who's the chair of the Ventura County Coalition for Compassionate Care, and Reverend Kate Lewis, who's the spiritual care manager at St. John's Hospital. So thank you both for being with us today. I'll turn it over to Kate.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's nice to have you back. Once again, we begin with this beautiful poem. For age is opportunity no less than youth itself, though in another dress. And as the evening twilight fades away, the sky is filled with stars, invisible by day. So I wonder if this poem has started to land in you. I wonder if you agree with it, that there is opportunity that comes throughout our stages of life, not just with youth. And that the stars that we're able to see now as older people were invisible. We couldn't see all that we can see today. We couldn't see those things then. And that's just the way it is. So I wonder if that's landing with people, how you're feeling about that. I hope so. That's sort of the point of what we're doing together, which is these 3 sessions on shaping your last chapter. And so we've posited to you over the past bit of time that acceptance of the aging process is, oh, my machine's making noises at me. I'm gonna try and make my machine stop making noises at me. There we go. I apologize. That acceptance of the aging process leads us to incredible wisdom. And that the truth is we are quite wise. We have been around the block. We know many things. We're coming to wise points in our life. As Terry told us, our brains are actually able to hold so much more than they were. And even if we are moving into perhaps lapses in current cognition, we are so deep in heart cognition. We know so much and we are so wise, and accepting that is a beautiful thing. And so from that, we took you on to the idea of thinking about your whole life story. We invited you to think about a whole bunch of life review questions. We invited you to go to the Stanford Letter Writing Project website, which also helps people think about sort of the arc of their lives. What's the story of your life been? What are the themes that matter to you? For me, you know, when I was 15 and 16, they would tell us that the whole world is your oyster. You can do anything. You can be anything. The world is a million choices. That may or may not have been true, but for me, that was a burden to feel all of those choices at 15 or 16 or 25. Now that I'm 63, I'm accepting the narrowness of my life, the particular choices that I've made, and I'm seeing a bit of a pattern in the choices that I've made, and I'm celebrating them. And the fact that I didn't become a figure skater, or I didn't, you know, do this, that, or the other thing, it does not bother me anymore the way that it used to. And so I wonder if over the past week or so, you've had a chance to maybe think about the trajectory of your life, and have you gained any insights? Have you learned more about who you are as a human being? So with those 2 questions, where and what is my wisdom? Who and what and how am I as a human being? Who am I? How am I? What am I? With all of that much more clearly solidified into an awareness. Now, when the time comes to interface with very aggressive medical treatment, how can we make the choices of how much medical treatment we would want? How do we make choices that are congruent with who we know ourselves to be? And how do we communicate those choices to other people? So overall, our hope is that you've come to know yourself better, to trust yourself more, and you're now ready to think about the interaction between medical care and your life. So, Terry. You're on mute.
I'm on mute. Hi, I'm Terry Helton. I'm a registered nurse. I have had and I'm saying this today as we go into this, I've had a variety of work in my life. I have been a nurse in the hospital. I have been a nurse working with those long-term who have to have a breathing machine, a ventilator to breathe. And I've been a hospice nurse, and I've taught nursing. So I bring some experience behind me. One of my heart strings is to really talk about decision-making at the end of life. Having seen it in the hospital not happen and having seen it happen, it just is part of what makes my heart beat. And so as we proceed, we're going to start with talking about advanced healthcare directives. Martha, if you can advance the slide. Thank you. We're going to, real briefly, this is what Kate talked about, that you are wiser than you think and your story matters. And as we covered that the last couple of times, I agree with Kate that have you taken that into your being and understand that, because making your choices known as we step forward in your medical decisions is really important. And it should be what your choices are and not what other people may think is best for you. You're the one that knows in your heart and your mind what needs to happen. And you're the brave person to have those conversations. So we're going to move forward. And part of what I want to focus on is that these are conversations, that it's not a document. We're going to talk about documents, but the focus should never be the piece of paper itself. The focus needs to be the conversation with those that need to know. So Martha, you can advance that. So here, an advanced healthcare directive is what we're going to talk about first, and then later we're going to talk about a different document that's called a POLST. So we're going to focus on this. And this is a document for anybody 18 years old and over who can sign by themselves. They have that ability. So it's a way to make healthcare wishes known if you're unable to communicate. And we live in a society, in the last 2 years, we have seen people who could communicate 1 week and suddenly they had COVID and they were in the hospital and they couldn't communicate with anybody, and it became very difficult. But even today, I can communicate well, but strokes run in my family. And there is that possibility I could have a stroke and lose that ability to communicate. So I want to be sure that my husband, my family, my healthcare providers know what I want if I were to become unable to communicate. So the second thing it does, it allows a person to do either we need to appoint somebody to make decisions for us. And it also allows us to write down the future healthcare decisions we want made for us. Now, I'm going to say this right now before I forget, is those are future healthcare decisions. When I was 50 years old, I don't think, and I'm 68, almost, March 2nd, I'll be 68. So on those healthcare decisions, when I was 50, I felt differently about than the decisions I am making now. So this is not a once and done. This should be a continual conversation. Next slide. So it's a process. Advanced healthcare planning is a process. So we want to consider our wishes. Part of what we've been doing the last couple of weeks is really thinking about that. Mm-hmm. You want to select an agent, also known as a decision maker. We want to discuss the wishes with that agent, the loved ones, and your healthcare provider. The first person to talk about this with, though, I'm going to tell you, is your loved ones. Complete the advanced healthcare directive. Give copies to the agent, loved ones, and healthcare provider, and then periodically review it. So move forward. Next slide. So which document do I use? It can be so confusing. There's no single form in California. There's nothing magical about the form. We've already said that. And there's several to choose from. And when you go to the website, you'll see these and Martha will send this out. So all of these are points that you can look it up. But I'll show you on the next slide that here's 2 examples. Here's the 5 wishes that I'm sure you've heard much about. Here's an advanced healthcare directive put out by prepare.org. It is so simple, it walks you through it. And if you had gone to the Stanford Letter Writing Project, you would have seen a document there that they just took you through every step there was and simplified it and helped you think through the process. So there is also the ability to take a piece of paper, begin to write on your wishes, put a date, write your wishes, sign it, and that is also a legal document. It's called a hologram. If you meet with your attorney, you can do it that way, and that is a legal document. So there is no one right way. Next slide. So what is important, and I'm going to bring it back to that idea of a conversation, is choosing to make who you make the medical decisions for you if you're unable to, known as that agent. So it needs to be someone who knows what matters to you, that conversation, someone who's willing and able to make the decisions if you become unable to make those decisions. They have to be 18, they don't have to be a relative, and they don't have to be local. But I want to go back to this word able that I've highlighted here, because not everybody is emotionally able. Often we think about able as somebody who's able, physically, mentally able to do it. I'm talking emotionally able. And I tell the story of my own life of, it's 2004 now, that my father died in 2004 and my mother died 4 months later. And my sister, who is 9 years older than me, babysat me, taught me to color, washed my hair, basically was my surrogate mother as I grew up, called me. I live in California, my parents live in Albuquerque. And she called me when my mother died, standing in the bedroom, saying, in sobbing, I need you to talk to the paramedics. I need you to talk to the firemen. And she's standing in the same room. And hands me the phone, hands them the phone. And I say, you need to stop CPR. This is not what my parents want, and it's okay to stop. She was unable emotionally to tell them that. And at that point, I'm going, this is not a person I want making decisions for me, because I really don't think I want CPR. So she had the emotional ability to love, care for me, but not the ability to make a major decision that was important to my parents. So that's what I'm talking about. And that's why we talk about it doesn't have to be a relative. Sometimes in marriages, it's better if a friend is making that decision instead of the spouse, because the spouse is so emotionally connected, they might not be able to say stop, or they may be so upset, they may not be able to say continue. So it can work both ways. So move on, Martha. So what's important? Choose the kind of healthcare you want. And to those who care for you will not have to guess what you want if you're not able to tell them yourself. And so the document itself will go over things like, do you want to have your life extended? And on what basis do you want your life extended? Some people want to have everything done possible. They want to go on a ventilator to have their lungs have the breathing for them. If they can't breathe on their own, they want to have feeding tubes. They want to stay alive as long as they can, because they believe science is going to have some way to make them come out of this situation. And then there are people like me who would say, well, you could keep me alive temporarily, but if I'm not doing any better in a couple of weeks, I really don't want to continue to exist like this. I don't want to live, in my terminology, like somebody that you have to keep turning so that my skin stays intact, I don't get sores. I basically want to be able to enjoy life, and I really want to enjoy food. So it's really important to me. So that as much important that I was thinking today, last night when I woke up, what am I making for dinner tonight? Because we have such a busy day. That's how crazy I am. So the document also goes on to give you areas to write specifically what you do or do not want to do. So you can always change the document to what you need it to say. and you put your initials there. It talks about what you want to do with your body, if you want to donate tissue or not, or organs. And it talks about how you want to, you can actually have your decision maker say how you want to be buried. So those are some basics of the document. We move on. So what do we do to make it a legal document? It must be signed and dated in front of either of these two things. So a lot of people will fill out this document at home. They don't have a conversation. They sign it and it stays hidden someplace in their house, and nobody has any idea what these choices are. And then there's confusion, or they don't have a conversation. The document's filled out. They may get two witnesses to sign it, or get it notarized, and they still put it away and nobody sees it. This doesn't do anybody any good. The most important thing you can do, again, I will repeat it, is have the conversation and then have it either signed by a notary, and you're signing it in front of the notary. What they're doing is witnessing your signature to say you're the person who signed this document. And then if you don't want to have a notary do it, you can have two witnesses do it. Now, it's important that the person you put in there as your decision maker can't be a witness. It has to be another person, and it's preferable that it not be a family member. So this is my story, how it happened with me. And I always have to make this confession because it shows how easy it is, and it shows how we can overcome our own personal biases or beliefs that we don't often recognize. So I told you I worked in a hospital. I worked at Pleasant Valley Hospital, and I believed in advanced healthcare planning. I believed in the documents, but I didn't have one. And I would admit patients to the hospital and have them, fill one out or make sure they brought it in. And I was doing my courses for nursing and my bachelor's before my master's. And we actually had a course and we talked about this, and people would raise their hand that they had one. I couldn't raise my hand. Couldn't tell you why I didn't have one. So one day I had to have a shoulder surgery, and I sat in the waiting room at Pleasant Valley Hospital, and I thought about the unit there with people who survived on ventilators. And I thought about the man I'd heard about recently who didn't come out of a surgery very well. And the surgery went okay, but he couldn't come off the breathing tube. And I went, I don't want to be like that. So I am suddenly pulling up the document that the hospital offers, and I'm writing it, and I'm calling the chaplain. Now I'd be calling Kate. Back then it was Chaplain Knapp, and said, I need two witnesses. Notice I know what I needed. And lo and behold, David Chaplain Knapp came down, and he got two witnesses sitting in the lobby with me to witness my document to make it legal. They didn't have to be anybody who knew me. All they needed to do was see me sign that document. So by the way, I have figured out why I didn't want to do it, because my superstition that I didn't want to confess to was, if I sign this, something will happen. And that's something we often don't want to admit to. By the way, I have redone my advance directives 10 years later when we did our living trust. And our advance directive is not in the trust, it is separate. And that's something to consider if you have an attorney help you with this. So that's my little story. The third thing we didn't mention about signing was if somebody is in a facility, if they go into a nursing home, an ombudsman has to witness that advance directive. Now, the directive can already exist, but they will ask the person entering the nursing home, is this correct? Is this what you want? If that directive is made in the nursing home, then they must witness it so that they are protecting that person. That's why they do it, so nobody can take advantage of them. Next slide. So what I didn't make a slide for was the importance of, after you have it witnessed, that you photocopy it and you share it with everybody in your family. that you share it with your healthcare provider, and that you put it someplace where people can find it. It does not belong in your safety deposit box, and it does not belong in your fire safe. It belongs someplace that you can find it. The other thing I didn't discuss, which I think is important, is for your agent, and I don't know why I forgot this, but you've chosen a decision maker. It's a good idea to choose a second decision maker, maybe a third one. And the reason I say that, in my case, my husband is my decision maker if I can't make decisions for myself. But we have a little problem. We travel together. And if we're in an accident and he is unable to make decisions for me, then who's going to make those decisions for me if I survive and he's unconscious or he died? So I have alternates on there that can be reached to make those decisions. So that's really important. The other thing that's important to do is to not leave people out of this conversation. It's important that you have the whole family in the conversation and you explain to the people who are not the agents, the decision makers, why you chose the people you did, so that there's a reason. So this whole conversation thing is, I make it sound simple, but I will also tell you, I know that it's not always simple. So if you have any questions, put them in there and I'll be glad to answer them. Did I miss anything, Kate?
I don't think you did. Just to really reiterate that indeed we look to these documents in the hospital, and the minute somebody comes in and they're receiving any kind of, when they come into the emergency room, we run straight to the computer and we look to see if we have anything on file. We look to see what their decisions are. And even if you've only had a conversation with us, if you've spoken to us, we try to at least capture that. So that's one thing. And even if you have the document, but you never got it signed, we look at that. Well, at least this is an expression of the person's wishes. It may not be a legally binding document, but here we find that at least 2 weeks ago, Mary wrote down that this is what she would and would not want. And that's what she was saying 2 weeks ago. So at least we can go by that a little bit. Right. So we take whatever bits of conversation we have, and whenever you have a conversation with the doctor, they try and record that. And so we do our best to really try and figure out what the person would want. And then Terry, I wanted to also highlight the concept of surrogate decision making. The reminder that any document, anytime that a hospital asks you for a decision for a loved one, we are not asking you what decision you would make for that person. We are asking you, what would that person say if they could be with us today? So we're looking for surrogates, people who will speak on behalf of the person's choices, not their own choices.
Not their own choices. And
there are some documents out there that have a really great thing. They have a little section now that says, my agent has permission to deviate from what I've written here, or it has, my agent has no permission to deviate from anything I have written here.
Well, that's
so
good. That's I like to know that. I will say there's it's really this conversation, this being open with friends, family about this is so important. I've done some speaking about this in public, and with Dr. Dial from Livingston, we've shown the Consider the Conversation movie. And I had somebody go to those who was very upset, and still after a few years, still feeling upset. She was a daughter, and her mother had made the advance directive, the decisions, and never had a conversation. And the daughter loved the mother so much. She went through with the decisions that her mother wanted. She did the right thing for her mother, but they had two different sets of beliefs. And the daughter following through with the mother's wishes left her with such a burden of guilt related to her faith. So I say that because, again, the conversation, the openness to talk about it is so important. And I feel so badly for that lady who would feel that burden. So,
yeah, healthcare is a blessing and a burden. Healthcare can be too much. It can be hard.
It can
Oh, I
be,
feel for that person too. Thank you.
yeah. So that's why I always emphasize how important it is to share. And if, I don't know the ages here, but it's a conversation that we need to start when we're younger. And as we age, so many people they're afraid to talk about this, probably for the same reason that I didn't want to sign a document, and how we have to find a way to open that window to have that conversation and
You,
allow
you know
for the
what?
understanding.
When people come into the hospital and I give them the documents, we ask them pretty much don't fill this out in the hospital because you're not feeling good.
Yeah,
You may feel like you want to die today when you really, in the big picture, you don't. But we say, here, I'm going to give you, how many people are in your family? Oh, there's 4 plus your daughter-in-law and your son-in-law. That's 6 adults. I'm going to give you 6 copies. You take these home and use the fact that you were just in the hospital, but you're getting discharged. Use that to sit everybody down at a dinner party and sit everybody down and say, we're all going to do this. And we're
right.
going to do this because I just had a close call and we need to all talk about it. So you invite a conversation that's not loaded, that includes everybody. It's not just the one person who's on the hot seat, but
Right.
everybody talk about their wishes. And then 10 years later, when, Mike gets in a car accident or something, and they think, remember when we had that dinner? He said never. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so lightening the conversation and using a hospitalization as the reason to pull your family together and get everybody to talk.
Very
is
important.
good.
Yeah, it is a good one.
And if you're trying to talk to your elder, if you say, Mom, I'm going to do this for me, let's do it for you too. And have that conversation, but don't just put it on mom.
No, don't just put it on mom. And the other thing is, it's often, this is the crazy thing, it's the elder who wants to have the conversation. And the
Because
child,
they're wise.
and the child doesn't want, no, I don't want to talk about that.
That
Right?
is so true. I have so many 40-year-old adult children who can't understand that mom and dad are ready.
Yeah.
Mom and dad are fine with coming closer to the end of their life because that 40-year-old is nowhere near fine.
That's right.
But me trying to help them understand that, mom and dad are okay with this. This is normal. Yeah.
It's important conversation. So, and I've had the conversation enough now that my husband heard something on TV and he said, you should hear that. That's my wish.
Oh.
He was reminding me, this is what I do not want, or I did want, right? So
yeah, see, so the ice is broken enough in your house that there's no superstition about it.
right.
Although there are cultures where there is a superstition about it. And in that case, a healthcare provider can bring up the topic more than a family member can. There are cultures in which it would be so rude for a young person to bring that up with their parent. But that's why we have healthcare providers, and they can do the end run for you.
And sometimes those healthcare providers need to be encouraged to bring that conversation up. So
yeah, they may not know that you're open.
That's correct.
To it. Yeah.
So very good. Should we move on to the post?
Yep.
Okay, let me just pull up the other PowerPoint. Apologize. And there we go.
You are speedy with that. You're good. You're better than me.
She's well practiced. So this is a post overview, and the POLST is an acronym for Physician Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment. And so if you'll move to the next slide, Martha. This is what the post form looks like. Many of you may have already seen it. The color, I'm just going to say up front, the color was chosen so that it could be seen. It doesn't matter what color it is. It could be white, green, chartreuse, pink though. So
Oh, that's green.
That's green. So it can be any of those colors. It is chosen pink for our state. It has been around, the law that passed this has been around in 2008. The forms have been around since 2009, and they've been transformed a little bit each time. Now, I say that so that you will know there's a difference between the POST and the Advanced Healthcare Directive. They're both legal documents, but the POST is a form that had to go through the California legislature to become a printable form. And there's a little bitty, and I'm circling up here, if you can't see my finger on it, but if Martha could take her, I don't know if you can do that, Martha, and take your pointer.
Yeah, right there.
That talks about the EMSA, that's the Emergency Management System. And they have to approve any changes that are made on this document. And then it goes back through to get approval from the legislature. So that has happened a few times. It happened in 2009. They realized the color they used was too awful to make photocopies. So they made it a little lighter. And then they realized that that was 2011. And then they realized that the document setup was a little bit, could be better. So they did that in 2014. And then magically, we convinced the nurses and different agencies, convinced the legislature that nurse practitioners and physician assistants should be able to sign the document as well as physicians. And that was the last change that was made on this. Plus, they wanted
any POST is still in effect.
Any POST that was signed in 2009 is still good to this day. However, I would encourage people to revisit it and see if there needs to be any updates. So I say all that to let you know that this is a physician or a medical order, and it is different than the Advanced Directive. It's similar in some ways, but it is different. If I were to have a medical event at my house, say a stroke, and the ambulance was called and they find the advanced directives and I'm not breathing and my heart's not beating, even if my advanced directive says to do not do CPR, they would have to do it legally with the advanced directive, the form we just talked about. If I have a POST and it says on there, I don't want CPR, then they will not do the CPR because this is a physician order that says that. So I like to say that up front, that there is a major difference. The other major difference here, and I think it's important to know, is that anybody 18 and older should have an advanced directive. A POST is for any age when there's a decision maker that can sign it, even for a child, and a medical healthcare provider that will sign it.
And if there's a chronic reason, a chronic condition.
A chronic condition that we would not be surprised if they were not with us in a year or two.
Mhm.
So, and that's why I say for a child, if a child had cancer or a disease that was very debilitating, that they didn't want to do CPR on them. So if we can move on. And next slide, Martha. Sorry. So we're going to break this down. As you see here, these are doctor's orders. I forgot to tell you, I should have moved it then.
Yeah, we should have. Oh, well.
It is okay, but you can see where the patient's name can go. This is a document that Kate would love to find in her records at St. John's if you were admitted. So, and that's where the medical record number could be there. And as you can see, it talks about all of this in here. This one was 2016. The last 2017 is because we want to be able to do this electronically. It's a very small difference.
Okay. I'll switch it. All right. The consent is not on there.
No.
Okay. Got it.
What? Oh, that's a good question, and we'll get to that. So hang on to that. So next slide. Section A is if a person has no pulse and is not breathing, we would probably say, if I didn't have a pulse and I wasn't breathing, I would be dead. So we have to consider that. But what we have done in our society, and we know, is that if we attempt resuscitation, we do cardiopulmonary resuscitation, and that's what CPR stands for. There is a possibility that we could restart the heart and the breathing. And so that is one decision on here. And Martha, I'm going to ask you to point to the attempt rescue. Right there, that's one decision. The other decision is do not attempt resuscitation or to allow a natural death. Now, this is where I have to make a real important point, and I need you to hear me on this, is if you attempt resuscitation or do CPR, then when we discuss the next section, which is section B, the only choice you have when you do CPR is to select the first box, which is full treatment. So you can move on to the next slide. So
Right.
remember, there's no right or wrong. It's your personal choices. So this is section B. If you chose in box A that you wanted to have CPR, then you would have to have full treatment. And that's the primary goal of prolonging life by all medically effective means. This would mean that you would need to go on a ventilator if you weren't breathing on your own. This would probably include, if you were on a ventilator, a feeding tube to give you nutrition for a period of time. It would mean that they would probably be putting in other lines to make sure your heart is working well. They would give you IV lines to give you medication, and they would probably keep you mostly asleep while you're in the ICU. And the communication is very, very difficult. Do notice that there is a trial period for full treatment. So if you choose this part, you can click the box, and the person who makes the decision for the trial period is the healthcare provider in consultation with family. So if you chose, if we go back, you don't have to go back, Martha, but if we chose not to have CPR, if we allowed a natural death, then in box B, you could choose full treatment, or you could choose selective treatment or comfort focused treatment. And so if suppose I had emphysema and I did not want to have CPR, I just can't stand this idea of breaking my ribs and puncturing my lung and who knows what else. And while I'm not getting oxygen to my brain, that, I could be suffering some brain problems because of CPR. We didn't talk about that CPR in itself is 2+ inches of 120 times a minute. And it's so hard, and it breaks bones. You can hear them cracking. It's a horrible situation. So in my personal life, I really don't think I want CPR. So, but if I had emphysema, I would want full treatment at this point in my life, because I'm only going to be 68. I have a lot of life left to live. So I've collapsed at home. The paramedics come and they see my pulse, and it says, she doesn't want CPR, but she's breathing and we need to get her out of here to the hospital. And they get me to the hospital, and in the emergency room, they see my pulse that goes with me, and they say, she doesn't want CPR, but she's still breathing. And I think we need to help her out. And we're going to put her in the ICU, and we're going to give her that full treatment. And we're going to put her on that ventilator to help her have some relief. And everything I described about that ventilator is going to happen to me. They're going to help me breathe with the ventilator. They're going to put tubes in me to measure my urine and to give me IV fluids and to give me medication. And so
they're going to restrain your wrists.
Oh, they're going to restrain my wrists because I'm going to be pulling at that. Yep. And so I recover in a week or so, and I go home and I go, I don't think I ever want to do that again. And I meet with my physician on my follow-up appointment, and I say, I want to change my pulse. Now, I still don't want CPR, but I think I want selective treatment. And so that means that my goal of treating my medical condition while avoiding burdensome measures, I don't want that vent ever again in my life. But there are other things I do want. I still want those antibiotics. I still want to have some help with breathing. And so they could help me with the BiPAP machine to help me breathe externally, but nothing goes down my throat. So there are other things that can happen. And if I happen to live in a nursing home, then they could do that probably in the nursing home. But if I live in my house and I have a collapse, and it's going to happen again because I have emphysema. I really don't have emphysema. I have to say that. This is a story. And I collapse. They're going to come and they're going to say, oh, no CPR, but you know what? We need to, you call, we haul to the hospital. And lo and behold, in the ER, they're saying, well, let's put her here. We're going to put her in the ICU, but no ventilator. And we're going to start her with the BiPAP and all these medications. And I come out and I do okay. And I've done this about maybe 5 times in a year and a half, and I'm exhausted. And I have a follow-up appointment with the physician, and I say, you know what, I think I need, well, actually, let's say it this way. If my physician is brave enough, my physician would say to me, you know, maybe we should have another conversation. Is your husband here? Can we have this conversation together? And say, so you've been in this many times in the last 18 months. That's a lot of times. And you seem like you're really tired. Do you want to consider changing your pulse? And I go, you know, I think so. I've been thinking about this. So I still don't want CPR, and I want comfort-focused treatment. And this means that I don't want to go back to the hospital. If I have an attack, I just want to be at home and be comfortable there. And this might actually be a good time for the doctor to talk about maybe my end of life wishes for hospice too, or palliative care, and what those decisions might be. So that is how I can do no CPR in any one of these things in box B. Do you have anything to add there, Kate?
No, I think you're clear. Yep.
Okay. So any questions, please put in the chat and we'll
Well-
catch your questions and answers. There's somebody for, we're getting to that point. We're going to answer
Yeah,
the
okay.
question. Section.
That was section B. So section C.
Section C, regarding artificial nutrition and feeding tubes. Does the doctor order this? Long-term trial period or none? And this is where I love Laura Zimpel's example about if I could turn around and show a feeding tube that is short-term, goes down the nose and throat, all the way down to my stomach. And that's temporary, but there's problems with those feeding tubes that we don't always talk about. And a feeding tube may mean that they're going to have to tie my hands down or give me medication to keep me from pulling
Oh,
it
and
out.
first of all, getting that feeding tube in,
Oh my gosh.
going through the nose, and then you have to swallow the darn thing and swallow it into your stomach. Like people scream when they're getting feeding tubes. I'm just saying.
They do.
I probably shouldn't talk like that. I'm sorry.
Well, and I've been on the other end of putting them in, and it's, yeah. And if they need to do an x-ray after they put it in, because that tube could go into their lung and actually fill their lung up with fluid, and that's happened. And even if it doesn't go into the lung and they're not careful, I mean, you have to sleep sitting up, basically, the tube can come out and migrate to the lung. I'm telling you all the awful things that can happen. So that's what they do in when you can't eat in the ICU. They will put down a feeding tube temporarily. People who have strokes or Alzheimer's will sometimes have a temporary feeding tube. Then if there is a discussion, and this is where doctors come in and they talk to family and say, well, we could give her this long and she would probably get better if we had nutrition. And this is where the conversation with your family is so important, to determine what you do not want and you do want. Because if I were in a car accident and I was going to recover within a couple of weeks, I would probably do the feeding tube so I could recover. If I had to have a surgery to fix an esophageal problem, a stomach problem, and it were temporary for a feeding tube, I would do that. But if I've had a massive stroke like my dad did, and there was no recovery, and I knew that he would still be swallowing or aspirating, meaning the fluid going into his lung from his own saliva, I would not want to have a feeding tube. And I knew my father didn't want to have a feeding tube. And we do know from studies that people who have major strokes, they don't survive any better than people who have feeding tubes. So that's a conversation to have as a family. And if the short-term feeding tube is going to become permanent, then they put the one into your stomach, and it is a small surgery. And it's still the possibility that fluid from that feeding tube can come up through the gut and into your lungs. It also can cause extra fluid to build up and become edema in your legs and in your gut. And it causes some people to be very uncomfortable. Plus, you can have infections around the feeding tube. Now I've told you all the icky, nasty things. Or I can choose to have no artificial means of nutrition, including feeding tubes. I actually know it says offer food by mouth if feasible and desired, so you can write in there. I actually know a physician who has announced to the public, and he and his wife agree, and their daughter knows, that if he cannot feed himself, do not feed him.
Hmm.
So he has made a decision in that stand. Now, I'm not sure I'm there. This has actually prompted me to have a conversation with my husband, and he was kind of on that page too. If I can't feed myself, don't feed me. So anything that needs to be cleared up with this? So somebody, and I want to answer this question right away because we're on
Yeah, I
feeding
think we need to,
tubes.
yeah, get to the question.
Right. This feeding tube issue is that, how does this have anything to do with CPR? Well, when,
No, does CPR have nothing to do with allow natural death? Do you have the whole question there?
I may not.
She writes, so no CPR has nothing to do with allow natural death?
Slightly confused. No, CPR has nothing to do with allowing a natural
They actually
death.
mean the same thing.
They do mean the same thing.
Is that,
If you do not want CPR, you are allowing a natural death.
and this is new language we're translating into the hospital, and we've started to include it in all of our electronic medical record
Mhm.
keeping. Allowing a natural passing, allowing natural death is the new name for DNR, do not
Correct.
resuscitate. So Maria, is that making sense? And then she wonders, what if the primary care physician doesn't want to do a pulse? That's a good conversation to have.
It is.
I'd like
and
to know
so-
why.
Exactly why. So I want to go back to the feeding tube though, and then we'll do the signature thing. So Sandy asks, under additional info, can you state only use feeding tube if chance of recovery? Yes,
Mhm.
you could do that. And that's part of, again, I feel like I'm on this soap opera of the conversation, but I can't emphasize enough that even with your healthcare provider, this is not a checkbox. This is a conversation that needs to happen. And this is not, this is beside the point, but it might be good for you to know in case your physician or your nurse practitioner doesn't know, they can actually bill Medicare for having these conversations with you. So they shouldn't feel rushed. They should, and they can do this more than once. So this is an important conversation, not a checkbox. So
Okay,
I can't emphasize that enough. What?
On that question, I'm assuming the one you would check would be trial period, and then you could write in this additional orders only
Yes.
if chance of survival or chance
Yes.
of recovery.
Chance of recovery.
And often recovery is a little bit different than back to baseline.
Oh, that's a good, yeah. Can you describe that, Kate? That's so true.
We often talk about, well, you know, they have CPR, they may recover. Well, recover to what? Back to the baseline, back to gardening, back to driving, back to, no, what you want to ask when you're talking to the doctor is, will my loved one get back to baseline? That's the magic word. Will they get back to where they were? Or are we at a change point? Has something drastically changed that will never go back to the way it was? So recover can mean just laying there with eyes open and yeah, your heart's beating, but nothing else is happening. That could be called recovery if you're not clear. So,
That's
in
true.
this thing, if you wanted to put trial period of artificial nutrition, including feeding in tubes, if recovery to baseline is anticipated, or if recovery to, if return to baseline is feasible,
Correct. Well,
if baseline is important to you.
it's the baseline, coming back to that. The other part of this conversation is, we say this is for people who have chronic illness. We would not be surprised if they died within a year or two. But this is also a document that is good for people who have dementia and they have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, to have this conversation sooner than later. And the whole idea of the artificial feeding tubes is important in this, to understand, is it going to be beneficial or is it going to cause, it's the benefit hurt ratio. Is it going to cause more distress than it is helpful? And a lot of people don't understand is with Alzheimer's and other dementias, the brain actually loses the ability to tell the parts of the throat that you swallow to swallow. And people begin to swallow into their lungs. And as the brain shrinks, this becomes even more difficult. And it helps with the brain can't tell the body to move. It's the same idea.
So in some ways, that's kind of the normal passing away from dementia.
Yeah, it is. We used to call the pneumonia
You can say it.
Yeah, the old
was-
person's gift.
The old person's friend. But that would be a natural way of passing away, is like my ancestors on the prairie. Their dementia would get to them where they would forget how to swallow. We make 2 liters of saliva every day,
Mhm.
and that saliva would start to go into their lungs and they would get pneumonia and they would die.
Yes.
And then they wouldn't have 15 years of dementia at the end of their life. They might have a shorter time, but
So there is no easy answer on this. It's
dying's not
all,
fun, and we don't think it's fun.
no, it's all
I mean-
a painful journey. And
But the question is, how do you want to do it? What's congruent with your life?
correct.
And as rich Americans, and we are rich Americans, we have the ability to choose a little bit. And people in other countries don't have the ability to choose these things. So it's a bit of a burden to have these choices, but it's also a blessing.
It is. So what makes this a legal document? So that the paramedics will read it, or the doctor will know it, or the nurse practitioner, is the information and the signatures. So as you can see in section D, there's a place to put whether you have an advance directive and if it's available and been reviewed. If it's an advance directive that's not available, and then if a healthcare agent is named in the advance directive, who is that? It would be nice to put it on there. And if things change, then the post would also need to be updated, or if there's no advance directive. And the advance directive again tells them who's that major decision maker. That's important. And that major decision maker, back to that conversation and understanding of values and what matters to you. If you had a accident or dementia, that major decision maker can make a post for you, and you want them to be able to make the right decisions for this document. And then, as you can see, the signature of the physician, nurse practitioner, or physician assistant goes in here. This only becomes a legal document when it is signed by one of them with their license number on there, and then the person who's making the decision, either yourself or that decision maker. And then this form, the photocopies that you're going to make and share are just as legal as the original document. And again, it should be shared with people, and it should not be put in the fire safe or the safety deposit box. It should go with your advance directive and with your current medication list in some place that can be easily found, like on your refrigerator, on the entrance to your bedroom door. It could be on the bathroom wall, someplace that's easily located by paramedics. And there was something else I wanted to say about this, and it went out of my head.
Registry piece or no?
Oh, I'd love to have the registry piece. Oh my gosh.
We have a couple questions to get to, so.
Okay, so we're working on having an electronic registry, right, Martha?
That's right. That'll be a whole nother seminar, I think, in the future.
Okay, So the post is for people living with a serious illness, is a doctor order that goes with the person wherever they are living. We covered that, and should be revisited when there is a change in condition. I think we covered that well. And these are places you can find it. Anything else? It is part of the summary of advanced care planning. Think about your choices for care, your wishes, talk with your loved ones and your healthcare provider. Select somebody, complete the advanced healthcare directive that we talked about and the post if necessary, and then keep them in a known location and periodically review and update if needed. And
And now that you are wise and you know real well who you are, you can do this more easily.
I know somebody had the question about their primary care physician not wanting to
Yeah,
talk
I
about
got
it.
confused between the questions in the chat. So if you open the chat, you'll see what I was talking about. I
I
apologize.
did.
Yeah, so she says, yet the paramedics can still give CPAP and antibiotics. And the answer is yes, if you choose full or selective treatment. Even comfort focused treatment might include CPAP and antibiotics. So this is what Terry was working to say, is that you can be, if you find me and I'm not breathing and I have no heartbeat, if you find me and I'm dead, leave me alone. I'm done. Natural death. If you find me and I'm still just really sick, you can do a lot of things. You could intubate me if you want to, if I choose that. You could only just do things like BiPAP and antibiotics, but you're talking about, Maria, the middle section, that's basically selective treatment. Or I can ask you to just keep me comfortable and just sort of, give me ice cream and cigarettes. I'm kidding. No, I'm not.
You don't smoke.
I will when the day comes. I'm sorry. That's one of the joys, right? That's looking at what's important to you. It's someday when I am old and gray, I want to try one more cigarette one more time. And I quit 30 years ago.
Oh, okay.
But that's a value. But right, there's going to be a day that I care more about French fries and ice cream than I care about cholesterol.
Oh, yes.
So same bucket of things.
Same bucket.
There's going to be the day I care more about hanging out with my dog than the allergies it causes me.
So I'm going to go back to a logistical thing and have the question about the physician not wanting to talk about it or sign it. So a specialist could do this. If you see a nurse practitioner, they can do that. It doesn't, some people ask, well, what if my doctor dies? Well, then it doesn't matter because the signature is still good. The post will be good. So that's okay. Sometimes people ask, what if I travel? And not every state has a post. These advanced directive and a post are done on state basis. However, as Kate said, when they have an advanced directive that's not been signed, they still look at that and determine care based on what they thought that person's wishes were. So you can travel with these documents and make sure that they're known in the United States and they will probably follow them. The other thing is, and I didn't talk about it, but I think it's important, and I've learned this, is the way to share does not have to be in paper document. It can be on your phone. It can be, sometimes people want to have a thumb drive so they can save it someplace, but you can take pictures and put on your phone. And I sat in the Allure in Camarillo a few years ago in the bar section when it was crowded. And this gentleman next to me, it said, excuse me, as my husband and I were having a little bit of a political conversation, and he just interjected himself into it. And it was very pleasant. And then Tim and I are eating, and all of a sudden I'm hearing him have this conversation with somebody who stepped up to his table, and he's talking about a heart thing. And he's pulling out, and pulling out his phone, and my head is going, don't do it, Terry, don't do it. Don't ask him, don't ask him. But I did. And I said, so do you have an advanced directive? And this man was 83 years old. And on his phone, he pulled up his durable power of attorney for health. So I encourage people, 83-year-old man a few years ago, using his cell phone to record. And you could see his ultrasound of his heart on there too.
That's great.
So I like to encourage that.
One more question about that physician's signature. If your physician signs the post and then later on that physician becomes tried for malpractice and the license is suspended, then will that post still be valid? If a license is suspended, will the signature be valid?
Because it was valid when he signed it.
Wow. Okay.
Mhm.
That's good to know. I wouldn't have known that. This has been so informative, and I really appreciate both of you providing sort of the raw, harsh realities of what these different treatments look like.
Sorry.
And I've heard some of it before, but I still, when I hear it, I find it like it affects me physically, you know, it makes me very uncomfortable. And I think if everybody could hear this, then at least they're making informed choices for themselves. And I think that's really important. And it doesn't mean that they're not going to want to choose all of those things, but they should know what that looks like. So I really appreciate that honesty. I think that's so important. And I also wanted to say that, you know, Terry is the chair of the Ventura County Coalition for Compassionate Care. And so when I email out a copy of this recording, I'll include a link to that website because that's a local chapter, but it also provides links to state resources. And also that group made a wonderful video that has people talking about the need for advanced healthcare directives and sharing some of their personal stories. So I will send that link out tomorrow to everyone, and I would definitely encourage looking at that if you still have questions about these topics. So I really just want to thank you both for 3 seminars in a row to make sure that we really address these important topics. It's been wonderful, and I know how much I've appreciated it. So I just want to thank you and thank everyone for listening. Any last thoughts, Terry?
I have a thought that you ought to plug your Caregivers Day, Caregivers Recognition Day.
Sure, thank you for that. Yes, if any of you are caring for a loved one, and that's why you were on this call, we have our annual Caregiver Recognition Day event on March 10th, and it is a virtual free event for anyone caring for an aging loved one. It's really meant to thank you, reward you, and just be a wonderful session that we'll be offering with free goodie bags and everything. So please go to seniorconcerns.org where you can register for that and spread the word, because if you're not caring for someone, I bet you know somebody who is. So please spread the word. And then also, actually next week, I'm teaching a seminar called Dealing with Dementia. So if you're caring for someone specifically who has dementia, then you can go on our website to our seminars page and learn more about that 2-day class that I'll be offering over Zoom. So thank you, Terry, for reminding me.
Yeah, I look forward to doing this in person again when we're able to interact with everybody who's watching with us and have rich conversations, because again, the whole thing is based on conversations.
Yes, and I will put a plug in. If you're associated with any type of faith community and you would like to have something done in your faith community for this congregation or a reach out, we would be glad to do that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Please reach out. You'll all have my email tomorrow. And
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Another thank you. So thank you, everybody, and I hope
you.
you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.